So, hello everyone. I would like to start to introduce a little bit us to you. You're very welcome to Sustainable Design Special Interest Group and the webinar series 2020. Um, and today we will have a presentation from Daniela. And before I start to present her, I will introduce myself a little bit. I am Sofie Hallstedt from Blekinge Institute of Technology in Sweden. I'm also the co-chair of Sustainable Design in Special Interest Group. And today I'm very happy to have Daniela to give us a presentation. But before I introduce her to you, I would like to give you a short introduction about us and our key activities that we have within Design Society. So Sustainable Design SIG is actually just one of 16 different special interest groups of the Design Society. And the main goal is actually for the Design Society is to bridge the gap between research and practice in design. So we are part of a broad community with more than 800 different participants, both from industry and academia. And we have a shared goal to develop and promote design. And when we talk about design here, we mean it in a broad sense, design of products, services, and systems. So we are spread in more than 15 different countries, and there are many different activities going on every week within Design Society. So you can learn more about that by listening and also go into our web page, which is designsociety.org. And here you can find more information about the different activities that's going on and also how you become a member so you have access to all good sources. So now I will introduce you to Daniela Pigosso. Daniela is Associate Professor at the Technical University of Denmark, TTU, where she is currently the Head of Studies at Design and Innovation. Her main research focus is related to circular economy, sustainable design, product service system, also sustainability assessment and business model innovation. So Daniela also have very good collaboration with a number of Danish and international companies and also serve as the chair of the Sustainable Design Special Interest Group at Design Society. So now I would looking forward to listen to Daniela's presentation. And during the presentation, I would like everyone to write down questions. We have a Q&A box. So please write down your questions there, because we will have a short discussion after the presentation. So please, Daniela, thank you.
Thank you very much for the very nice introduction, Sophie. I'm very happy to be here today to talk about circular economy readiness. And this has actually been in our mind for quite some time now, because we could basically see that there was a strong need for circular economy implementation into companies. But at the same time, many companies didn't really know whether circular economy was something for them and whether they were actually ready to make this transition from a linear to a circular economy. This is a Danish project that I'm co-leading together with Professor Tim McAloon, which had the main goal to understand how to measure circular economy readiness, and then after that, how to actually help companies to become more circular and to actually be able to decouple value creation from resource consumption. The need for the project was very clear when we started that. There was lots of discussions about making this transition from a linear to a circular economy, especially after some reports that were stating that there's a huge business benefit in doing that. In fact, 1.8 trillion euros per year. And then lots of companies were really trying to understand whether that would make sense for them to make this transition, and also what would be the implications in their key business areas and also in their overall sustainability strategy. So in the match project, what we did was to start by trying to understand how are the key dimensions that are important for any organization, any company that want to go through circular economy. And we actually, after doing lots of research and after talking to many different types of stakeholders, we identified 8 key dimensions that are key for making this transition. And the dimensions, they are a combination between internal capabilities in the company, but also the state of the external environment in which this company is inserted. So I'd like to briefly go through those 8 dimensions together with you so that we can understand what they mean, why they are important from a readiness perspective, but also we can see some examples of companies that are already doing a very good job in making this transition. And I've tried to select both small and medium companies and also large companies to exemplify that we do have circular economy movement no matter what's the size of the company that we are talking about. So if we go through the first dimension, this is about strategy and business model innovation. So the basic idea here is to measure what are the capabilities that the company have to develop a long-term strategy that will bring circular economy into its core and that will redefine the way they deliver value to their customers and also their overall business model. And there are many different business models that we can talk about when we try to make this transition to circular economy. So the example that I have here is from a sharing system that is one very well-known type of business model for CE. And this is a Danish company, Buscykling, which developed a very well-structured model to provide access to bicycles in Copenhagen, where people would only need to pay a fee. The circular element here is that one single bicycle would be used by several people within the time, and by doing that, we'd of course be able to optimize the use of the resource that we have put into the bicycles. It involves not only redesigning the bicycle, but also designing all the infrastructure around it and all the different partners and stakeholders that are key to make the system work in a proper way. Focusing on business model and strategy is important, but if we move towards the second dimension, this is also extremely important to look into product and service innovation. And the basic idea here is to understand whether companies are ready to develop new solutions, and here it could be both products, services, or a combination of the two that are suitable in a circular economy context. We do have several of different examples here as well, and the one I brought today is from Repack. This is a company that could see the biggest challenge with packaging in the e-commerce industry, and they wanted to minimize the overall impact of that by proposing a reusable packaging. They, of course, had to look a lot into how to design the package in a way that it could be reused several times. But they also had to design the system and the service around it to be able to provide incentives for end users that are receiving those packagings in their houses to actually give them back and keep the closed loop in that system. And if we want to talk about the bicycle sharing that I just mentioned to you before, they also had to design the bicycles in a specific way to fit the requirements of a sharing system. So focus on product and service innovation is a key area when making this transition to a circular economy. And the same goes for the third dimension that talks about manufacturing and value chain. We need to be able to reuse resources within our company in our production facilities, but also to establish partnerships in the value chain that will enable us to maximize the value that are flowing along different partners, and at the same time enable a system that can actually close that loop. Another important area when we talk about manufacturing and value chain has to do with raw materials, and sometimes developing completely new materials for a given specific application. And this is exactly the example from Carlsberg when they started developing the green fiber bottle. The basic idea here would be to develop a biodegradable bottle made out of paper, and that would be able to provide the key function of delivering beer to key customers, but at the same time have a much lower environmental impact. And that would be directly into the biocycle within a circular economy. What happened though is that there was no well-established value chain to actually be able to provide this raw material to them. And there was actually also no production technologies available to manufacture this type of bottle. So with the idea of closing the loop and with this particular focus on the biocycle, they had to completely redesign their value chain, the type of materials they were using, but also their production and manufacturing processes. Moving forward in the life cycle, the next important dimension that we have for circular economy implementation is technology and data. Digitalization has in fact provided some opportunities for circular economy that weren't really there before, but that made several different initiatives possible. The basic idea here is to try to understand what are the key capabilities in the company that can create value by the time that we manage data in a better way, and by the time that we use that data to enable access and shared access of the provider solutions to more customers and to more users as well. An example here is Waste IKE. This is a startup from Norway that developed a smart waste management system. The basic idea is that every person would have this token, and this would activate the machine to actually get your waste, household waste. And the idea here is that that data would enable them to understand how much waste is being created per user. They would also be able to know how often the waste is being provided in the system, but also when would that be time to actually fill out the waste bins. And if you look at the right side, you can also see an additional box there for paper, beverage, and plastic packaging. And the basic idea here is that the users could enhance the recyclability of their waste by separating them, and the incentive would be to pay less for the waste that they are providing. So this is a very interesting example on how IT, big data, the Internet of Things can change behavior towards more circular measures. With that, they managed to minimize overall waste by 10% and to increase the recyclability of plastic waste by almost 30%, which are some quite interesting indicators as well. Use, support, and maintenance are also extremely important dimension when we are talking about circular economy implementation. The main goal here is to understand how we can extend the lifetime of products as much as possible, so that we can actually extract all the value that we put in through the manufacturing processes, use, distribution, and so forth. Some of the strategies that we can use here are, for instance, maintenance, repair, upgrade, remanufacturing, refurbishment, and so forth. There are several different companies working that front. And the one that I brought here is Cone Cranes. That is a Finnish company developing those big cranes for the industrial sector. What they done was actually to combine digital technologies with sensoring data, IoT, and usage data to predict when is the right time to make maintenance of their products. It is a win-win situation for the customer because the product will continue working for a longer time, avoiding crashes and breaks and so forth. And it's also a very nice benefit for cranes because they would be able to ensure availability of their machines for a longer time. They would be able to replace spare parts at the right time, and they would also be able to extend the overall lifetime of their product. This is an industrial example also to show that circular economy strategies can be applied, as I mentioned before, small and large companies, but also business to business and business to consumer companies. Dimension number 7, and we are almost in the end of the 8 dimensions, is take back and end of life strategies. And this dimension measures what are the capabilities that need to be in place to ensure that we can take products back from our customers, but that we can also implement the right circular economy strategies that would be able to sometimes expand the lifetime of the product to another users, but some other times be able to extend the lifetime of the materials through recycling technologies, for instance, or cascading approaches. The example that I brought here is from a Danish company called Refurb. Their basic idea is to take back used electronics products from a number of different types of stakeholders, usually companies and government. What they do is to do an analysis to check what's the health of the equipment they are taking back. Depending on the technical features and potential breaks or failures, they will do a repair of this product. Sometimes they will refurbish. But the basic idea is that they're going to be put that back in the market and reselling that to other users. They have a very nice certification scheme where you can actually see what's the overall state of the product that you are buying and make your purchasing decision on the basis of that. By doing that, they are really having a huge impact on minimizing the overall waste of electronic equipment, but at the same time in delivering more value from the same amount of products. All of those dimensions so far, they've been focused mainly internally in the organization with their value chain. But if you really want to make this transition to a circular economy, it's also extremely important to look into policy and market. And this dimension deals with understanding what is the legislative framework that we have around a given sector, a given region, a given country, to understand potential barriers for circular economy, but also potential opportunities there. And at the same time, looking to market acceptance of secondhand products, of reused products, of recycled materials, and so on and so forth. So having this understanding of the external environment becomes also extremely important for companies to be able to define what is their playing field and how they will want to bring circular economy. The example that we have here is from Copenhagen Village, which is a Danish company which had a very strong vision of providing affordable housing for students as part of a total service system. Their basic idea was to take upon used ship containers and transform them into a suitable accommodation for students that would provide them a community feeling and at the same time enable them to live close by to the universities. What's interesting here from a policy point of view is that at the time they had the idea of doing that, It wasn't really allowed to do so in Copenhagen or in Denmark. And they had to go through a series of negotiations with the government to be able to allow installing those villages in those places for an amount of time that would make sense to their overall business case and to their overall mission and vision. Today, they are finishing up the construction of the second village and really much looking forward to expanding that to other cities in Denmark, but also to other countries in Europe. So here it's interesting how a circular economy idea drove a very important change in the legislative framework that really allowed for more circular solutions, and here especially from a social, an environmental, and also an economic. And last but not least, organization is also a very important dimension. And this is really looking inside the company and trying to understand what are their capabilities to implement new concepts and new business concepts like circular economy. And one very traditional example here is, can we actually calculate what's the business case for those different circular economy models that we want to implement? And can we actually make sure that those circular initiatives will be more sustainable as well from an environmental, social, and economic? And the example that I have here is from Bose. Bose is a large American company developing hearing equipment. And they do have a very systematic approach for understanding what are their current capabilities in the organization from a sustainability maturity point of view, and using that as a stepping stone to move away from single and pilot projects when it comes to sustainability or circular economy initiatives to actually having that implemented into their cross portfolio in the organization. And this has to do with understanding what are the key activities we need to implement when, for instance, developing a new product, or what are the different knowledge and skills that we need our employees to have, and so on and so forth. So with that, we close the 8 dimensions that are key for circular economy implementation in a company. And then you might be asking yourself, okay, that's interesting. So now I have an overview of 8 different areas that are important, but how can we actually use those to measure how ready am I as an organization to make this transition from a linear to a circular economy? And that's exactly what we developed in the Match project. That is a free assessment tool that we can access through my.match, which enable companies and organizations to understand for each one of those dimensions what is their readiness level, to identify what are the strengths and the gaps today, but also to define how to move forward and how to actually become more circular over time. The way it works is on basically 3 steps. The first one is to create a profile in the website, which will allow you access to the free assessment tool. The idea here is that this should be answered by as many people from the same company as possible to allow for a very strong and broad understanding of different initiatives going on in the organization today. The assessment takes about 30-45 minutes per person, and it is composed of 30 different questions that are classified across the 8 dimensions that I've just presented to you. And what we do here is to analyze for each one of those questions what level they have in terms of readiness. For instance, is that something that they did not really start doing yet? Is that something that they have some ad hoc projects going on and some ad hoc ideas on how to do it? Is it something they are piloting already and trying to understand how their ideas would work in practice? Or is that something that they have tried, it works, and they are right now scaling up so that it moves from this pilot project to a broad uptake in industry? The next step after doing that is to have this very detailed overview of their readiness. So we do have a number of different data that we provide to the companies in terms of strengths, gaps, in terms of agreement between the different stakeholders, in terms of number of assessments, and so forth. And all of that can be downloaded in a report which can be shared across different stakeholders in the organization with the goal of enhancing awareness of where we are today, but also creating the baseline for defining where they want to be in the future and what are the key steps they can take to get there. So a little bit of data. So far in the platform, we have more than 170 companies, and they are spread. We have many of them in Denmark, but we do have also many companies in Europe in general, also in North America, in South America, and in Asia. And the companies are from many different sectors, many different sizes. And the interesting thing is that the companies are also bringing many different employees to perform this assessment and to become more knowledgeable about where they are today. So you can see here that we have 540 assessments so far, and all of them coming from more than 13 different industry sectors. If we look at the second area, you can see here the readiness score of those companies that we have in the platform. And the total readiness score that a company can get is 150 points. And we can see that in average, those companies that came into the platform, they score 34. It tells lots of different things. The first one is that usually companies don't come to the platform if they don't really know what is circular economy and what are the potentials for that. So in most of the cases, they have some initiatives going on here and there. It also shows, and I'm going to show to you in a second, that there's happening an actually evolution of the overall readiness in the different sectors that we have in the database, which also shows that time is getting companies to become more and more ready to implement those activities. And before I share with you the key data that we have from those dimensions to provide you some insights about what is the overall readiness of industry, I just wanted to share with you two very key functionalities that we have in the platform as well to help companies to really understand how far they are in this transition. The first one is an internal benchmarking, where companies can basically compare the overall company readiness with the readiness of different business units or business areas in the organization. And this is really key to help them to understand how to share knowledge internally, but also how to reach an harmonized level across the different areas in the organization. So here you can see two different graphics and two different colors as well. The red color or the gray color basically shows what are the gaps, and the green area shows what are the strengths of that given area. So here, just as an illustrative example, this is a fake profile for DTU. You can see that this specific business unit on the right is much more ready in actually 4 different dimensions than the overall organization. It really helps companies to understand and to get going by having this dashboard. The other interesting area that the platform enables is the external benchmarking. So the idea here is to understand how ready am I in comparison to other similar companies that we have in the database. Of course, it's not possible to do it one by one. I want to compare me with a specific other company, but you can do that by using anonymized data from a set of different companies together. And you can also filter that to a given sector, a given region, a given size of company, and so on and so forth. And this provides very, very interesting insights to help you in this strategy making on what dimensions you want to focus on in the future to become more circular. Now into the data. If we look into all the companies that are in the platform, we could find some trends that we'd like to share with you in terms of strengths. So companies that are actually piloting or scaling up initiatives for circular economy. And then after that, I will also show you the gaps and areas that companies are not really focusing that much yet. One of the biggest strengths in all that is in strategy and business models. We can see that more than 55% of the companies, they have already integrated circular economy in their long-term strategy, which is an extremely impressive amount of companies, especially considering that strategy is a very key element in organizations as well. And here, in order to be able to show you kind of this evolution over time, we did a similar evaluation about 6 months ago, and the number was 46%. So we can see that in a relatively short time frame, we can see quite significant enhancement in overall readiness for circular economy strategy. The other strength has to do with designing products to fit within this circular context, and more specifically designing products for product life extensions. And here, almost 60% of the companies engaged in the platform, they are already piloting or scaling up initiatives to do that. And this can have, again, a huge influence into the overall impact of those products across their entire life cycle. Smart products is also becoming more and more relevant for many sectors and many companies as well. We can see here that 52% of the companies, they are already using technologies to monitor products during the use phase. So they are collecting data with the goal of using that to make the provision of their solutions more circular, but also to enable closing the loop. And the last strength I'd like to share with you today has to do with support and maintenance. And here you can see that about 60% of the companies are providing service to support the use phase of their products. And many of those companies, they're actually being able to create more value by doing so and become also more profitable in the longer term. I think that one of the key advantages of circular economy is that it actually enables companies to identify new ways of creating value that at the same time can minimize the overall resource consumption and not being dependent only on sales figures. So that's an interesting learning from those companies. If you look now in terms of gaps and what are the areas that most of the companies have not yet started focusing on. First one, organization. It still seems to be a big challenge for companies to be able to develop and calculate what is the business case for circular economy initiatives. It's of course a complex task. There are a number of different assumptions that you need to make, but also a number of different areas that you need to take into consideration. So despite being an important area that they really want to implement, they still don't really know how to do that. The second gap has to do with operations, and more specifically with establishing new partnerships in the value chain to be able to enable a circular economy. So identifying partners that you can collaborate with is a challenge, but also defining win-win collaborations and ensuring that you're going to have trust and transparency in the transactions is also extremely important, but still a gap. And then finally, if we look in terms of take back and end of use, we know that take back is key if you really wanted to close the loop of products and materials, but it's still 33% of the companies, they have not yet started to develop take back systems for their products at the end of life. The interesting thing here, if you look at the data from 6 months ago, is that it seems to be a very significant improvement on companies that have actually started doing so before. For example, if you look in terms of the partnerships in the value chain for circular economy, 54% of the companies were not doing that 6 months ago. Right now, it's only 20. So we can also see an interesting evolution and a nice trend there. But now companies know how ready they are. They maybe have defined what are the circular economy strategies or dimensions they want to implement. The next question that they have to actually be able to make this transition is, how do I do that? And what are actually the different tools available out there that can help me in this process? So in the Match project, we have also collected more than 70 different tools that aim to support companies in this transition. They are classified according to the dimensions and according to the different specific areas. And the idea here is that at the point that you know what is your readiness and what are the dimensions that you want to focus on, then you can easily filter the tools to find the ones that will help you to get there and to make this transition. And I've talked to you so far about the readiness assessment in terms of the dimensions, the questions, the benchmarking, the data that we got out of that. I just briefly mentioned about the tools that are available. We also have a number of different reports and knowledge sources in the website. We also have a number of cases of companies that actually successfully made the transition as an inspiration. But there's also the other important element there, that is the actual acceleration of this transition. And in the project, we actually had the chance to engage with a few of those companies in a very close collaboration. It was about 75 hours to help them to identify strategies, to plan initiatives, and to advise their way forward in their transition. So the way it worked is that everything started with this initial readiness assessment to understand what is our baseline today. Then we went through an initial exploration phase that would help us to set the scope. So the idea here would be to ideate as many different opportunities as possible and then start narrowing down in the terms of key strategic decisions to define what's the scope of your transition in this specific project. Then we would do some kickoffs to really go and have a deep dive into the initiative we defined it to implement, identifying how to do that, who are the stakeholders to be involved, what are the tools we can use for that, what are the outputs we expect, and also what's the business case for doing so, to be able to bring in the organization as a whole. And then finally, on the basis of that, we would be able to plan the scale up and have a very well-defined roadmap to implement the initiative. And of course, after this is implemented, the idea then is to evaluate the readiness again, to understand what has been the evolution over time, but also to be able to plan what to do next. It's a journey, and there are many different iterations that you need to do to actually become truly circular. Well, the good news is that it's still possible to join. So if you have the interest in being part of one of our accelerator programs, you're welcome to contact us. What's going to happen is that you need to, of course, make your readiness assessment as the first step. Then we would, of course, have to have commitments in the organization to go through those different steps that I just showed you, and also to have an active collaboration with us at DTU. And then you have the chance to become a case in our website, where we describe what's your journey to serve as inspiration for other companies that are also planning to do the same. And if you go into our website, you'll be able to see some of the companies we've been working with so far, and also what are the key findings and the key insights that this process helped them with. Well, that was basically that for today. I think that my last question to you is, how ready are you for a circular economy? And how can you actually accelerate your transition to that? So to invite you all to join the Match platform and the Match project, and to help us in having a huge impact in industry that will get our societies in the longer term also more sustainable. Thank you very much for your attention.
And thank you very much, Daniela, for this very interesting presentation and all good examples that you could give. It was really interesting, I think. And we also have many questions coming in. I don't think we may have time to do go through all the different questions, but we will start with a few of them. And I will actually maybe start with one overview question. Here is one from Jan. So do you see significant differences of maturity among industrial sectors?
Yeah, that's a good question. We can definitely see differences of readiness across different sectors. It's actually interesting to see what are the dimensions that they tend to be more ready in the electronic sector, for instance, in comparison with the furniture sector or with the food supply sector. I would say that this provides also some interesting insights on where the different sectors are moving towards, and also what are the different strategies that they can implement to get there. But sector is one of the elements. We can also see differences and interesting insights when we compare companies from different sizes. So from small companies to medium companies and larger companies. Usually, the larger the company, the less ready they are from an organizational point of view, for instance. But it's also interesting to see from a regional perspective. We can also clearly see what's the difference in readiness in companies from North America or in companies from Denmark or Sweden, and also companies from Japan, for instance. So I would say that playing around with those different external benchmarking data is very interesting also to see how we as academics or how the design society as a worldwide community can help to activate those different types of stakeholders.
Thank you very much. We have another question here about from Yuri. So, which are the circumstances you have identified when transitions to circular economy have failed or not given satisfactory results?
Yeah, it's also a good question. I'd say that there are many different criteria that influence success in a circular economy implementation. And they are to some extent connected to the different dimensions as well. So one of the examples would be commitment in the organization, and in particular, top management commitment. Circular economy sometimes requires some very strong changes in the way companies create and delivers value. So making sure that you have the right buy-in from the right stakeholders in the organization is really key to make that a success. Another example could be, for instance, the policy barriers. Sometimes there are some very interesting ideas from a circularity and from a sustainability point of view, but they are actually illegal from a legislative context. And then what to do there? Should we go for lobbying and try to change the legislation? Should we implement the idea anyways and then hope that it's going to be okay? Or should we don't do anything and wait up until the external environment is more ready to that? So I'd say many different areas can lead to a failure in circular economy implementation, but the more ready a company is, the more likely it will be to be successful.
Thank you. We also have a question which is related to the maturity of the company itself. So it's from Maria, and she says that what conclusions can you make based on the discrepancy between lower organizational maturity, yet high percentage of integrating circular economy in business model and product design?
Yeah, I believe that what happens there is that many companies, they are doing lots of pilot projects. So they're doing pilot projects for new business models, maybe establishing a sharing system, for instance, or they're doing lots of pilots about new product ideas or product service systems that goes out there. What happens is that if the company is not ready enough from an organizational point of view, it will be very difficult for them to move away from those pilots to an actual broad implementation of those ideas in the market, but also across their portfolio. So I would hope, or I would guess, that after companies have this pilot proof that it works and that it can be interesting for the organization, then the next step will be to become more ready from an organizational point of view to be able to make that as a part of their way of thinking and way of doing business.
And also if um, it is a case that this tool is more on a company, maybe overarching strategic level. How much is the design teams involved? How much of other departments is involved in circular economy?
Yeah, I've mentioned to you that it's important for the assessment to be relevant, to bring different people from the same company that will be able to provide different perspectives on what is their current readiness today. So the tool allows for as many employees to answer the questionnaire as possible, and this involves business and strategy people, this involves product designers and engineers, marketing, finance, business intelligence, manufacturing, sales and after sales, services, and so forth. And we actually have for every person that comes in the platform an evaluation of what is their expertise in all of those different areas. And what we do to show the final result in the platform is to do a automatic consolidation of all the answers of all employees that answer the questionnaire to come up with the overall readiness for that given organization or for that given business unit. This is for the readiness assessment. And then at the time that we start to actually making the transition through the accelerator programs, for instance, then depending on what are the areas that the company prioritized, we will of course bring the key stakeholders from those areas to co-develop the overall transition. So if the selection is, for instance, on product and service innovation, so those will be the key stakeholders to be used in those three main steps for planning and implementing the transition. That's the way that we try to bring different stakeholders together and at the same time ensure that we have a broad understanding of the organization. We have some companies, for instance, that have had more than 150 evaluations, all from the same organization, which is really great because they have a very robust understanding of their current readiness now.
Great. And we also have a question regarding if a company will need to will start up the circular economy transition journey. Are there any agency or any support in society that the companies can do? I mean, if they use your tool and so on, is there anything more that they can get support from?
Yeah. So within our project, we do have some time allocated to support this transition. It is especially for companies in Denmark for now, but where they can get our close collaboration over a given amount of time to help them in making this transition. We know that there are several consultancy companies also taking this role to support manufacturing companies in making the transition and in helping them to understand where to focus, how to deploy, and so forth. But for those companies that maybe do not have access to consultancy services, then we've tried to develop all of those different tools and knowledge and cases in the platform to enable them to do that by themselves. So there are a number of templates with very detailed guidelines on how to, for instance, organize a workshop, how to invite the right stakeholders to come on board, how to communicate the results, and so on and so forth. So depending on the availability and the level of engagement, many different modules are available for making the transition. But that's for sure, making the readiness assessment is only the start. And we really hope that companies will not stop there, because this is a nice tool to understand where we are today, but we will only be able to see change if we actually implement the actions and the agents.
And I think we have one last question here, and that is if you know any companies that span over the 8 dimensions that you have mentioned that you would say is outstanding or something like that.
Yeah, so far we don't have any companies in the database that are green or they are ready in all the dimensions. And we understand that because it is a long-term process. Circular economy is a relatively new field that is also changing and evolving a lot over time. But we do have lots of companies that have a relatively high readiness in many of those areas, which really shows that yes, it is possible, and yes, it is an interesting transition to make. We hope that over time, as we do those screenshots of readiness over time, that this will become more and more ready, and that industry will actually be very good in making this transition. And we can actually see that happening already from the data that I showed to you. So we hope that this can actually become faster so that we can reach the impact that we need for a sustainable society.
Thank you very much. And I would like to actually for us to close this session now, and I think also we end up with something positive here. We will probably see a transition now moving on in the right direction. So for next time, I would like you to also register for our next webinar, which we will have in June, the 25th of June. And that will be Jan Leroy that will give a presentation about changing end user behavior. So please join us for our next webinar. Thank you.